news comes first. This is ABC-7 Extra.
Good evening, I'm Saul Saenz, and this is ABC-7 Extra Sunday Edition. Thank you for permitting us into your homes and sharing your Sunday with us. Critical race theory, what is it? The Encyclopedia Britannica defines it as an intellectual movement based on the premise that race is not a natural or biological grounded feature of humans, but a socially invented category used to oppress people of color. It says institutions in the U.S. are inherently racist and maintain social, economic, and political inequality between whites and non-whites. It's taking center stage in today's society as educators, civil rights groups, corporations, and politicians try to grapple with the theory, how it impacts us, and what should be taught in our schools. Take, for instance, this magnifying glass. It gives us only one perspective as we look right through it of how we look at things. But shine the light on the same magnifying glass from a side view, and it gives you a prism effect, different versions of the same view. Tonight, we'll focus on the debate around history and the lessons our children are learning and will learn in school. The theory has become divisive as some critical race theory is being used to blame the color of our own skin for racism now and throughout history. Opponents say the past should remain in the past and the systems in place, which largely benefit one race, should remain in place. Slavery is behind us. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Proponents say slavery and inequity are part of the country's DNA and are still alive today. We're going to explore critical race theory in schools, where we wanted to show you a relevant exchange in Congress just days ago when a Republican representative questioned the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff about critical race theory being taught at West Point.
A seminar that over 100 cadets attended titled Understanding Whiteness and White Rage, taught by a woman who described the Republican Party platform as a platform of white supremacy. This is going on at West Point as we speak to our future military leaders.
I do think it's important, actually, for those of us in uniform to be open-minded and be widely read. And the United States Military Academy is a university, and it is important that we train and we understand, and I want to understand white rage, and I'm white, and I want to understand it. So what is it that caused thousands of people to assault this building and try to overturn the Constitution of the United States of America? What caused that? I want to find that out. I've read Mao Zedong. I've read Karl Marx. I've read Lenin. That doesn't make me a communist. So what is wrong with understanding, having some situational understanding about the country for which we are here to defend? And I personally find it offensive that we are accusing the United States military, our general officers, our commissioned, non-commissioned officers, of being, quote, woke or something else because we're studying some theories that are out there.
Well, here to help us navigate and understand such a complex but very important issue is a prominent advocate of Texas history, J.P. Bryan. He's a former member of the Texas Historical Commission and is one of the largest, if not the largest, collector of Texas historical artifacts. In fact, he founded a museum dedicated to Texas and Western history in Galveston, Texas. Also joining us is Daniela Leyda, a ninth grade social studies and world geography teacher in the Leyda Independent School District and member of the Texas State Teachers Association, which raised concerns about these new laws. I'm going to start with you, Mr. J.P. Bryan. Your opinion of critical race theory. You gave us a summation of it, but what is your understanding of critical race theory?
My understanding of it, well, that would be a lengthy discussion, but essentially it's a critical doctrine, I guess, that's taken from or inspired by Marxist concepts in which we unfortunately are at its core encouraging people to have ill feelings for one another, and to blame one race for the disadvantages suffered by another, but at the same time destroying the very things that have made America such a great country.
Right. You
Our
quoted
basic fundamental freedoms are truly under attack by CRT.
You quoted Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as saying, from his famous speech, that one ought not to be judged by the color of his skin, but rather by the content of his character. Do you think that critical race theory should be taught in our classrooms?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
And I think the comparison between what we heard as a preview or prelude to this conversation had nothing to do with teaching children in high school or in junior high school. Critical race theory as it's being taught in a number of the public schools across this country. Talking about people in college, sure, you can certainly study Marxism or you can study communism, and you're certainly not hopefully going to become one. Or you can obviously study some of the horrific things that happened in Germany, and you're not going to become a Nazi.
Right.
But we're not talking about that. We're talking about a theory that's being forced in the classroom of children that have no way to decide whether they're going to take the course or not.
That would be a good segue, Mr. Bryan, to bring in Daniela Leyda. She's a 9th grade school teacher. Ms. Leyda, do you believe that critical race theory should be taught in either middle school or in high school?
I don't necessarily, and just to make it clear that it's not being taught in the Texas public schools system currently. I know there's some misconceptions about that, but do I believe it should be taught? Not necessarily as a whole, but some of its aspects are important. It's an academic analytical tool that looks at why racism and racial inequality still exists even decades after the civil rights laws and anti-discrimination laws. So you can, we're probably already teaching certain aspects of it, but without teaching it as a whole. So I'm not here to promote anything, and by no means is it being taught in the public schools today.
Got it. We're going to take a really quick break. You're watching ABC-7 Extra. We're going to continue our conversation regarding critical race theory and the 1836 Project when we come back. I'll ask my guests if they believe the current version of Texas history, like the Alamo, needs to be revised. You're watching ABC-7 Extra, where news comes first.
Every drive is a joyride. The thrilling Audi sedan family. Get exceptional offers at your local Audi dealer.
The summer vibes have arrived at Casa Kia.
So can the savings when incredible offers on any new Kia.
With our exceptional service, you can kick back, relax, and enjoy your new ride.
We've got 2021 Kia K5s with 0% APR for 60 months.
Come see us for outstanding trade-in value during the Trade Up to a Kia sales event.
Start your summer off right at Casa Kia.
Or online at casakia.com.
Our Casa is to Casa, here at Casa Kia.
Delicious pizza on dough made fresh daily. New and classic games everyone loves. The post-match celebration. They're all made to be shared. Like our tasty 2 for $22 deal. Get 2 large, 1-topping handcrafted pizzas for just $22. Peter Piper Pizza. Pizza made fresh, families made happy.
At our dealership, we've been in business for 1 billion years, and we're here for you.
Cut! Alex, that's not how we do it.
You're right. That's not who we are. At Bravo Chevrolet, we're about culture, fun, and the experience. Plus, you get 0 down, 0 payments for 90 days, and oil changes for life. And you don't have to call me or track me down. Just come on in. And the best news is that we do have cars. Who are we? Bravo!
Welcome back to ABC-7 Extra Sunday Edition. Nearly 24 states have introduced or passed bills against critical race theory. Here in Texas, Governor Abbott signed 2 new laws. The first one, House Bill 3979, deals with social studies in the classroom. It does not compel the teacher to instruct students on a particular or controversial current event. However, it does give the teacher the time to explore perspectives of the issue. For instance, they may not be required to engage in training, orientation, or therapy that presents any form of race or sex sex stereotyping or blame on basis of race or sex. One race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. An individual, by virtue of the individual's race or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously, and it may not teach that an individual, by virtue of the individual's race or sex, bears responsibility for actions committed in the past by other members of the same sex or race, and may not teach that the advent of slavery, the territory that is now in the United States. That's just to name a few. Now, the second bill signed into law by Governor Abbott is the 1836 Project. The project calls for the creation of a 9-person commission to promote Texas history and values. It includes the printing of pamphlets with the state's history that will be available to anyone who applies for a Texas driver's license. They'll also be placed at state parks and monuments. The issue at hand is who decides what is printed, what version of history will it provide. We have a link to the 2 bills signed into law on our website at kvia.com. Now, I also want to welcome back billionaire philanthropist and historian J.P. Bryan. Mr. Bryan also holds one of the largest collection of Texas historical artifacts. And also joining us is Daniela Leyda, a high school teacher, high school student teacher in Isleta Independent School District. I'm going to start with you again, Mr. Bryan. Your opinion of the 1836 Project and House Bill 3979.
Well, so you wanted to talk about the 1836, or you want to talk about both bills?
Let's start with 1836. That's a good start.
Okay, good. Well, I thought the bill was wonderful in that it is going to encourage the teaching of Texas history, simply because we have in Texas the greatest history of any state in the Union. More books written about our history than any state in the United States. As a matter of fact, more books written about the history of Texas than all the other states combined. So that is what makes Texas different. It's the incredible historical heritage we all share. And it ought to be taught. It ought to be, we ought to demand that our school children learn it, because let me say something emphatically. It includes all types of people, good, bad, outstanding, terrible, all races, creeds, and colors contributed to that fabulous history, and they ought to get a chance to tell their story.
I want to follow up to the question I just asked you in reference to this, Project 1836. The history that we have now, does it exclude part of Texas history, though?
It excludes part of it?
Yes.
Well,
so a different version of the Alamo or the Porvenir massacre, situations that obviously a lot of people should know.
Well, I think our history is far more vast than that we often repeat or are taught in school. But I think we have probably the best display of human events occurred on this landscape we call Texas, of any place in the United States, or maybe any place in the world, when we see human exceptionalism on display, what was accomplished here, the freedoms that were an incentive to that, or the foundation of those accomplishments. But we can keep telling the history of Texas because there's so many stories to tell. We just don't need to focus on one particular vernacular in delivering that message to our school children and to the adults of this state.
Okay, Ms. Leyda, I'll get your opinion on that as well. What is your opinion of the 1836 Project? And do you think that it is, now that it's law, that teachers will be either compelled to teach it, or will they have the option not to teach it? What's your opinion?
Well, I think that's important, that part of the 1836 law is that to teach values, and that's already being done. Children learn values at school, they learn values within their community, and hopefully they're learning values at home. So I have no problem with that. But we can't just suppress certain facts or eliminate certain things that have taken place in the past. I mean, sometimes some history is very uncomfortable, but we have to teach it so that students are ready for the future and they can learn from the past and hopefully lean towards more of an equitable future.
Let's talk. So I'm going to follow up with you, Leyda. Oh, did you want to comment on that, Mr. Bryan?
Yes, I want to say that I think that exactly what she was saying is that the values are on vivid display if we study our history, that all our children and us as adults also should be motivated by. And I just finished, as we were discussing, a book about the Texas Revolution, and I had a big chapter in there on the Alamo, but more importantly on the Tejano participation. And a little known fact is that there were 8 Tejanos that died in the Alamo fighting Santa Anna's invading force, and they have been ignored for too long by historians, as has the whole story of the participation of Hispanics in the Texas Revolution. They came in greater numbers as a percentage than the Anglo did to that contest, and absolutely performed admirably and with great conviction and valor throughout that entire revolution. Very supportive of the entire cause of separation from Mexico.
Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a bit. We're going to take another break. You're watching ABC-7 Extra. Still ahead, there's very little known about the Puerto Massacre, a dark day in West Texas history. 15 unarmed Mexican-American men were slaughtered by Texas Rangers. Why is it not widely known? Because it's not in our children's history books. Should it be included? I'll ask our guest. We'll be back.
You've got enough to think about maintaining. Good thing the 2021 Volkswagen Atlas and Atlas Cross Sport have a lower cost of maintenance than Toyota Highlander. Come into your Volkswagen dealer today and get 0% APR financing for 60 months on the 2021 Atlas Cross Sport.
Eva's a great driver, and she deserves car insurance that puts her in control. That's why Root Insurance bases rates primarily on how you drive. Your braking, your turning, how much you drive, or how little. While most insurance companies rely solely on things like your age, education level, and zip code to give you a rate, with Root, your driving is the #1 factor we use to give you a better price. Learn more at joinroot.com.
At Oscar Leasers Hyundai of El Paso, we have inventory today. Fuel-efficient cars like Elantra and Sonata, we have them available today. Full-sized SUVs like Santa Fe and Palisade, we have them available today. Popular crossovers like Kona and Tucson, we have them available today. Many with 0% APR for 60 months. That's no interest for 60 months. Or 0 down. That's 0 cash out of pocket on any new Hyundai in stock. Or get no payments for 90 days. Shop today at Oscar Leasers Hyundai of El Paso.
You know that feeling when you get an awesome deal? At Conn's Home Plus, it happens every day. With top brands to furnish every room in your home, there's always so much to love. The quality furniture you know, state-of-the-art appliances you love to see, the latest electronics that keep up with you, and so much more. Plus, with our personalized approach to financing, you can get low payments over time, whether you have good credit or you're building it. During our 4th of July Parade of Savings, find rocket deals only at Conn's Home Plus.
You've got enough to think about maintaining. Good thing the 2021 Volkswagen Tiguan has a lower cost of maintenance than Toyota RAV4. Hurry in and get a 2021 Tiguan for 0% APR financing for 60 months and 90 days deferment on your first month's payment.
Welcome back to ABC-7 Extra. I also want to welcome back for this third and final segment, billionaire philanthropist and historian J.P. Bryan. Also joining us is Daniela Leyda, a high school school studies teacher in Isleta Independent School District. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to get back to what we were talking about, Mr. Bryan, just before we went to break, about several aspects about what your book is soon to be published includes that is not widely known in our history books, which has to do with everyone who took part in the Alamo. You want to elaborate on that?
Well, I was just saying that there were 8 Tejanos that participated in the Alamo, and I don't think it was about whiteness. It was about people's opposition to Santa Anna's repeal of the Constitution of 1824, establishing himself as a dictator, and then abolishing all the political establishment, and then choosing to invade Texas after he had already invaded Zacatecas and destroyed the community there. So There were 12 states in the Republic of the 24 that rose up in armed opposition to Santa Ana. So it wasn't like a Texas-centric event. There were a lot of participants from the Hispanic world for sure that were offended by what was happening. And the Alamo, the interesting thing about the Alamo, it was not it shouldn't be given all of the kind of importance in terms of what it may have done to eventually brought about a success for the Texas Army. But the courage of those men who were in that in that chapel or in that missionary was incredible. They knew they were going to die.
Yeah.
There wasn't any doubt about it. But they just thought that they could affect a better outcome possibly for Texas by doing so.
Right. Sadly, we know more. We know more about Sam Houston, and we know about obviously David Crockett and others, and we know very little about those that you just mentioned. I want to ask Ms. Leyda, do you believe that version of the Alamo should be included in our textbooks? What Mr. Bryan just pointed out.
I think everything, as I mentioned before, I think everything should be included, and that's what I do in the classroom. I include both sides and that leads to critical thinking for the students, and they get to, instead of everything being one-sided or what I think should be, I put that aside and I present the information to the students, and then I let them decide what they think.
Yeah. House Bill 3979 points out some of the things that can or cannot be taught, not compelling the teacher to teach certain, angles to a different topic. Does this give teachers more of a leeway, Ms. Leyda, to be able to expound more on history that isn't really widely known?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. House Bill, or now Law 3979, stipulates what can and cannot be taught, specifically not compelling the teacher to teach that specific angle of a particular subject. Do you think that this new now Law 3979 gives the teachers a leeway to expound more on those topics?
Well, I believe that you have to cover the topics, all topics, and let the students think for themselves. You have to, the students want to know if there's current events. They'll come into the classroom and they'll ask me about certain things. And it's almost always related to something in the past. So yes, I think, we should teach everything and let the students decide.
Mr. Bryan, who do you think, what determines what is in our history books? And do you think that there is there's a need to revise our history books, specifically maybe even include a lot of what you just discussed?
Oh, I think, unfortunately, the history books have become very boring, and that's my assessment of it. But let me just pass on something I think was very key that I just heard Danielle mention. And she said she's teaching her children to think and make their own decisions. And that's what teachers should be doing. Give them the issues as truthfully and as best you can, and let them make their own judgments about what they think they understand about that event. So I really applaud that. That's what every teacher should be convicted to do.
Let me play devil's advocate then. Can't we do the same with critical race theory? Stimulate the mind so that they can ask questions about that and possibly include that in our curriculum?
Well, let me quickly answer that by saying I don't think so, because the doctrine really encourages adversity between races. It doesn't bring us together and unite us in a common cause and a common concern for one another or an affection for one another. It doesn't talk about forgiveness. It talks about reparation. And it talks about white people somehow not liking or even hating black people. And I think that's a horrible message to both whites and blacks. I certainly, and throughout my life, have never felt any hate or racist sentiments towards blacks in the community. I grew up in a segregated community, so I know what that's all about.
Yeah.
But I love as many black people, maybe even more than I do white people that I have had the occasion or the good fortune to spend time with. So I just think the concept's wrong, and it shouldn't be taught. It could be discussed or debated, which our Danielle was just talking about. You can say, well, this is what this theory is, and here's the contra to it, and let children think about it. But don't give them one side like that's the truth. Pardon me, that's my duck call.
Got it. While you're muting your phone, let me ask Ms. Leyda the very same question. Should we be doing that? Should we be bringing the critical race theory in the classroom so that we can stimulate the mind and have them ask questions about that?
Well, I don't think there's one cookie cutter answer to teaching in general. So there might be some parts of the theory that would work and would open up discussion in the classroom and get things thinking. But I, for myself, I don't stick to one thing, whether it be the critical race theory or a specific textbook. I expose my students to various materials so that they can not just learn on one theory. There might be aspects of the critical race theory. It's like, hey, this is something, we can go over.
Right. Daniela, Leyda, and JP Bryan, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us on this Sunday evening. I appreciate you taking time.
Thank you for having us.
Pleasure. Always good to be with you.
And thank you for joining us for such a complex issue, one that we're sure to revisit once implementation of these laws go into effect. And once they do, it will be the topic of discussion in your household. I'm Saul Saenz, and this has been ABC-7 Extra. Good night y buenas noches.